Hello, I'm Chris Barber. You may wonder what on earth a band leader is doing in a motor racing circuit. So I'll tell you. I'm quite interested in motor racing myself. I have a load to land, race in a few events, and also my band have been asked to give a jazz concert here at Brands after the European Grand Prix next month. It's quite a way ahead still, but I thought I'd have a wander around now and see what's cooking. So how about joining me? Coming? This is the first time a Grand Prix meeting's been held at Brands Hatch, and 64 is also Britain's year for staging the biggest event in the whole calendar, the European Grand Prix. So they're really going to town down here, getting ready for the big day. These new stands, for instance, there's tons of timber and over 500,000 feet of scaffolding in them. That's over 130 miles. Then there's all the new terraces around the circuit. I reckon they'll be able to get about 100,000 people or more into Brands, all with a perfect view of the racing. There's activity everywhere. There's fresh paint going on here, and they're waiting for new paint over there. New buildings are going up, shops and restaurants too, and better amenities for the competitors. Transforming Brands into one of Britain's finest circuits is quite a job. There's an idea here somewhere, you know. I wonder if I could make up some music which would catch something of the colour and excitement of a big motor race. Maybe the boys and I could play it at the jazz concert on Grand Prix Day. I wonder. Even now you can feel the atmosphere building up. It's quite slow at first, but the pace gets faster. And you feel it getting more and more exciting. And then suddenly...
Saturday, July the 11th, 1964, and the Grand Prix has come to the Hatch. The long operation designed to make the popular Kentish circuit a fitting home for the Grand Prix of Europe is completed on schedule, and the crowds move in early. John Webb and the Grovewood Estate team who own the place wonder if they've forgotten anything. The RAC, organising their own Grand Prix for the first time since 1950, hope not. The British Racing and Sports Car Club, who normally promote here, promote much as usual. The Daily Mail's sponsorship has put the publicity machine into top gear, and everyone, but everyone, is here. Two days of exceptionally long practice periods have built up the tension and left their mark. It's a busy time for the personality spotters and the autograph hunters. Names like Moss and Surtees look well in an appropriate setting. And what better setting than Brands Hatch on Grand Prix Day, whichever way you look at it. Before the big race, the curtain raises, and many a curtain has been raised by touring car racing. Officials officiate in all directions. The tension mounts. And Jim Clark isn't the first man to bounce off Nick Sardett, the BRSCC secretary. It's four Lotus Cortinas in the lead, the works cars followed by the Wilmot entries, and Sir John Whitmore, deputising for Jim Clark, gives an impressive imitation of the world champion's knack for staying out in front. Into the bottom straight, it's Whitmore, followed by teammate Jackie Stewart, the discovery of the year, then Jack Sears and Bob Althoff, the regular Wilmot sparring partners. The touring cars used the full Grand Prix circuit at this meeting, but even in the old 500 days, there was nothing more fierce than this. Stirling's Bend, and what a splendid place to name after him. Into Clearways, back onto the original road. And nowadays, the 2.65 miles of Brands Hatch is no poor relation to any circuit in the world. Meantime, the Minis are having their separate battle behind the leaders. There's no smoke without fire, and there's certainly no lack of fire amongst this lot. Bob Althoff breaks a half shaft. Whitmore wins, Jack Sears snatches second place, Jackie Stewart third. But what getting on for 100,000 people have come to see is the Battle of the Giants, the struggle for championship points involving 4 world champions, their heirs and would-be successors. Today, Mr. Everyman's a driver, but still the top flight is reserved for the very, very few, and only the best is good enough. Record crowds at practice have once again seen Jim Clark and the Lotus snatch pole position with 1 minute 38.1, but only just. A new challenger was making good its early promise with the same Coventry Climax V8, the Brabham. Ferrari too was there, so how many cylinders this time? 8 for Surtees, 6 for Bandini, with the V12 still only the writing on the wall. From Cooper, 2 1964 machines as raced at Rouen for the newly joined American former champion Phil Hill, and Bruce McLaren, who has served the team so loyally for 5 years since his arrival from New Zealand. The British Racing Partnership with Lotus powered by BRM. And of course, the Bourne entry itself, alone amongst British contenders to build both engine and chassis. And talking of chassis, Centro Sud BRMs for Baghetti and Tony Maggs. In all, a field of 23 starters to delight all connoisseurs, even the imitation ones. Jim Clark goes out to the grid with victories at Zandvoort and Spa behind him. For Mike Spence, a great moment. He deputizes for the injured Pete Arundel in the Lotus team. Graham Hill, BRM, with 1 victory at Monaco, he's a bare 1/5 of a second slower than Clark and is backed as usual by Richie Ginther. So far, victory this season has eluded John Surtees, but his ability has now put him well into the running to add a 4-wheel championship to his 5 2-wheel crowns, and Bandini is no longer a beginner. Bruce McLaren, probably the most relaxed of them all, just loves his racing. Phil Hill invariably looks anxious. Trevor Taylor, so often unlucky. The Reg Parnell team of 2 BRM-powered Lotus 25s for Halewood and Eamon, and there goes Joe Bonnier in Rob Walker's Brabham. Bob Anderson with another privately entered Brabham, as has Joe Siffert of Switzerland, and Ian Raby. Frank Gardner with the new Wilmot Brabham, Tony Maggs, Centro Sud BRM, and finally Dan Gurney, Works Brabham, 3rd fastest, 1/10 slower than Graham Hill. The cars form up on the dummy grid well down the straight in readiness to roll forward for the start at 30 seconds to go, an idea developed to reduce the hazard of dead engine collisions when the flag falls. Still, the crowds wander restlessly among the new shops and restaurants. The stars take their places on the stage. Graham Hill's BRM gets a top-up. Back on the 6th row of the grid, Richie Ginther with the 2nd BRM. Mike Spence shows some trace of the tension he must feel, while Graham Hill has a final chat with the father figure of BRM, Raymond Mays. John Surtees looks pleased on the outside of the 2nd rank. Jack Brabham alongside him, 4th fastest and only 1/10 slower than teammate Gurney. Lorenzo Bandini, the rising star of Italy, on the 3rd row. Phil Hill with Ginther back on the 6th. A rare sight at motor racing, and a familiar one. Jim Clark in pole position with the Lotus, but he only got there this time in the last 3 minutes of practice. And will Dan Gurney repeat his French Grand Prix victory of the previous round at Rouen? The grid, Frank Gardner rams Chris Amon and is out of the race. It's Jim Clark leading from Gurney, Graham Hill, Surtees, Brabham and McLaren 6th. Lotus, Brabham, BRM and Ferrari on the plunging sweep out of Druids and down to the bottom straight. The critical uphill left-hander at South Bank Bend with the camber all the wrong way. And onto the 140-mile-an-hour straight through the dip of Pilgrim's Drop, the fastest section of the course, and there's no change in the order. Through Dingle Dell, another sharp dip, and it's still Clark, Gurney and Hill with only feet between them, Surtees, Brabham and McLaren hanging on, the rest falling back. Stirling's Bend, which goes on for longer than you'd think and calls for first or second gear and every inch of road space. Into clearways, tricky at 90 miles an hour and accelerating in the drift. A sensational standing lap with 79 to go and the pressure's on. Jim Clark heads down to it in the position he likes most to hold, but he's being harried. Behind the 4 leaders, the middle group sorts itself out. Lap 2 at Dingle, Clark still in front, Hill pressing Gurney, John Surtees 4th and hanging on. At Stirling's, Bruce McLaren, who is now 7th with the Cooper, has Bandini on his tail. Clark, lapping around 140.5, 95 miles an hour, tries hard to pull away. But after 2 laps, the pattern breaks. Gurney comes into the pits from 2nd place. The Coventry Climax V8 is misfiring, the transistor box smoking. A touch of over-enthusiasm with a fire extinguisher scarcely helps matters. Gurney loses 4 laps and all hope of snatching those elusive championship points for which he had seemed so well set up. Now Graham Hill tries desperately to close up on Jim Clark. Surtees 3rd, Brabham 4th, then McLaren and Amon has got going again. Joe Bonnier leads Innes Ireland in 8th position, and behind them, Mike Hailwood has a moment. No apparent damage, but that started a fuel leak, which ended his race. Now Graham Hill closes right up on Jim Clark. The circuit is getting slippery, and Hill piles on the pressure in the hope of forcing the leader into an error which would let him through. Tony Magg, Centro Sud BRM at the pits, and so is Ian Raby for an optimistic change of plans. Bruce McLaren stops out on the circuit. And poor Trevor Taylor out of luck again with the BRP. After a nasty accident in practice when his foot jammed on the throttle, he's now driving a sick car in great pain. Meantime, Ian Raby rejoins the race. Up front, the gap between Clark and Hill is never more than 2 seconds, and their fierce duel pulls them clear of John Surtees. Back in the field, there are private battles. Joe Bonnier is going well, while Phil Hill and Bob Anderson embark on a race-long struggle. But there's no need of a pit signal for Jim Clark. Grimly determined to stay in front, he has Graham Hill filling both driving middles. Bandini is now fourth. Jack Brabham, slowed by a fuel leak, makes 2 pit stops. Bob Anderson there is having a splendid drive. His Coventry Climax is still on carburetors, but he fights every yard with Phil Hill on the fuel-injected Works Cooper. Dan Gurney has restarted, but is still 3 laps behind this group of Ireland, Ginther and Spence. Mike Halewood finally stopped by his fuel leak, and teammate Chris Amon is also out with a burned-out clutch. Trevor Taylor comes coasting in, and Surtees, still third, has dropped back 50 seconds behind the leaders. All eyes are still focused on the brilliant display of the world champion in the lead. But the pits too afford their spectacle. Now, ladies, no under the counter work, if you please. Joe Siffert lies 12th. But now Joe Bonnier, who has been leading the middle group, brings Rob Walker's Brabham in. Worried by people constantly pointing to his car, he wonders if anything has come adrift. Still, Jim Clark remains in command. First he, then Graham Hill pile on the pressure, each finding that about 8 consecutive laps on the limit is all they can manage without a breather. For them, say half a second a lap. But always the Lotus leads, as Colin Chapman watches impassively from the pits. Then, suddenly worried by a fluctuating oil pressure gauge, Graham Hill falls back, but Sir Alfred Owen never bats an eyelid. Peter Revson, the young American private entrant, is in rear hub trouble with the BRM-powered Lotus. Dan Gurney now going well again, but hopelessly far back. The 2 Ferraris, now 3rd and 4th, handily placed should the leaders destroy each other. This time, Joe Bonnier is in real trouble with a fractured brake pipe. Watched from the Reg Parnell pit. For Rob Walker, who used to win